The Mr. Men Library.
Come on, let's go there. It's a mystery trip. Mr. Trains on Mr. Tracks.
Stories written by Roger Hargreaves and his son Adam Hargreaves. Audiobooks narrated by Samuel Dudley, aka Uncle Mammy.
It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Marvelous. Mr. Marvelous could do truly marvelous things. He could run faster than Mr. Rush. Why, he could even run faster than Mr. Rush driving a car. He could cook better than Mr. Greedy. His meals were so delicious that even Mr. Skinny ate too much. He could even do the impossible. He could change color. He could even change shape. In short, he was a marvel. Now, Mr. Marvelous's marvelousness was also very helpful to his friends. Like the time Little Miss Chatterbox cornered Mr. Quiet. Mr. Marvelous out-chatted Little Miss Chatterbox into silence. And when Mr. Tickle was tickling Little Miss Giggles mercilessly, Mr. Marvelous even out-tickled Mr. Tickle. So when Mr. Marvelous heard a cry for help, he did not hesitate to rush to the rescue. Little Miss Tiny was being pulled up into the air by a large kite. "Help!" she cried. Mr. Marvelous leapt into the air higher than even Mr. Bounce could bounce, and grabbed the kite string and saved Little Miss Tiny. "Oh, thank you," said Little Miss Tiny in relief. "I was flying my kite with Little Miss Naughty, and when we got it in the air, Little Miss Naughty let go with me, still holding on." "Well, we shall have to see what we can do about that," said Mr. Marvelous. "It can't be that difficult to be naughtier than Little Miss Naughty," Mr. Marvelous said to himself as he set off to out-naughty Little Miss Naughty. His first naughty trick was to change color so that Little Miss Naughty could not see him. Then he pulled her bow undone. But you would have to admit that's not very naughty. What was much naughtier was Little Miss Naughty tying Mr. Marvelous's shoelaces together and laughing when he fell flat on his face. Mr. Marvelous realized that he was going to have to try harder. So he set his marvelous brain to thinking, and it came up with a thoroughly fiendish trick. He would dig a trap for Little Miss Naughty to fall into. That night, Mr. Marvelous picked up his spade and his flashlight and stepped out his front door, and fell down a hole! A hole dug by Little Miss Naughty. A hole full of molasses. The next day, Mr. Marvelous set out determined to get the better of Little Miss Naughty, but he could not go anywhere. Someone had let the air out of his car's tires, and we all know who that someone was. Try as he might, Mr. Marvelous could not be as naughty as Little Miss Naughty. He had met his match. "The truth is," said Little Miss Naughty later that day, "that there is nothing marvelous about being naughty, and that is why you can't out-naughty Little Miss Naughty." "Oh, I see," said Mr. Marvelous, who did not feel quite as marvelous as he usually did. And then he had an idea. "What I need is some help," said Mr. Marvelous, "and I think I know just the person." So, then and there, Mr. Marvelous went to see Mr. Mischief, and Mr. Mischief knew just how to put Little Miss Naughty in her place. Now that was a marvelous idea, although I doubt Little Miss Naughty would agree.
Let's go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and see Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Adventure. Mr. Adventure liked going on holiday, but not the sort of holiday that you and I go on. He thought beaches were boring. He wanted the thrill and excitement of an adventure holiday. He liked to go places that would make your hair stand on end. Mr. Adventure went on holiday exploring remote frozen lands. epic expeditions across the white wilderness. He went on holiday diving in the deepest oceans, discovering sunken wrecks. He went on holiday trekking through far-flung tropical jungles, sleeping under the stars with one eye open on the jungle creatures. However, this year, Mr. Adventure had a problem. He did not have enough money to go on one of his wild adventures. To go on a new adventure, he would need to get a job. And so, that's what he did. He got a job as a postman. But being Mr. Adventure, he found posting letters into letterboxes rather boring. So, to make it more interesting, he took his mountaineering gear to work with him and climbed the wall of each house and posted the letters down the chimney. This certainly made delivering letters more interesting. However, it also meant everybody's letters were late and covered in soot. So he was told not to come back to work at the post office. The next job he got was as a plumber. And of course, Mr. Adventure found fitting pipes and repairing taps boring. To make it more interesting, Mr. Adventure took his canoe to work when he went to fix a leak. This definitely made plumbing more exciting, but it also made people's houses wetter. Much, much wetter. And so he was sacked from his plumbing job. And it turned out that wearing skis to his building job was also not a very good idea. Things were not going well. Mr. Adventure had not saved a penny. He looked longingly at the map on his wall. How he wished he could go on a proper adventure. And then Mr. Adventure got a new job. A job as a firefighter. A firefighter called to emergencies. Emergencies like climbing a very tall tree to save a cat. This was not boring. The next day, he had to break down a door with an axe. This was definitely not boring. And the next day, he had to put out a fire in a burning house. Mr. Adventure had found a job that he liked. A job that suited him down to the ground and right up to the top of the ladder. In no time at all, Mr. Adventure had saved enough money to go on holiday. Enough money to go to the wildest, remotest, most dangerous place you could think of in the whole wide world. So, where did Mr. Adventure go? Why, he stayed at home. Being a fireman was a much greater adventure.
Let's go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and sing. Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Calm. Mr. Calm woke up in his bedroom in Treetop Cottage and stretched. He opened his eyes, and as he complimented the day ahead, the chirping of the dawn chorus floated in through his open window. Chirp, chirp, chirp went the birds. But suddenly the peace was broken by a loud shout. Be quiet! It was Mr. Calm's next-door neighbor, Mr. Grumpy, who did not enjoy being woken up by the dawn chorus. Mr. Calm went to the window. Good morning, Mr. Grumpy, called Mr. Calm with a cheery wave. There's nothing good about it, retorted Mr. Grumpy. Mr. Calm went downstairs for breakfast. He sat back in his chair and sipped his soothing cup of tea. Suddenly, the tranquil quiet was shattered by a loud noise. Crash! And then another loud noise. Bang, walla, bang, bang! It was Mr. Calm's other neighbor, Mr. Noisy, playing the drums. Drums at breakfast time! Good morning, Mr. Noisy, called Mr. Calm without a glimmer of annoyance. After breakfast, Mr. Calm went out to his garden to do his morning exercises. Suddenly, his concentration was broken by a voice, a rather bossy voice. This is just not good enough. Look, there's a leaf on your path, and your pond needs cleaning, and your hedge needs trimming, and your gate needs painting. It was Mr. Fussy, who lived across the road from Mr. Calm. Good morning, Mr. Fussy, said Mr. Calm calmly. So, as you can see, Mr. Calm was the calmest person in the world. He was as calm as a calm sea on a calm day. Nothing could upset or disturb him. When he set off for his daily walk, deeply breathing in the fresh morning air, he was not upset by Little Miss Quick, roaring along the roads in a fog of fumes. Nor did it upset him when Little Miss Stubborn cut the line in front of him at the grocery store. Mr. Calm was calm even in a crisis. He stayed calm when his boat capsized in a crocodile-infested river. And he stayed calm when Mr. Small's climbing rope snapped. But there was one thing that did slightly trouble Mr. Calm's thoughts, and that was how hectic his friends' lives were. As he walked through the tranquil woods, he decided that he would try to bring a little calm into their lives, and as he walked, he had an idea. What his friends needed was a nice, serene walk. A nice, serene, peaceful walk in the woods. That would be just a solution. However, the reality of the walk was a long way from serene, and even further away from peaceful, and it was definitely not calm. Mr. Grumpy moaned and groaned that he was tired and his feet hurt. Mr. Noisy noisily stomped and crashed about the woods, scaring all the wildlife. Little Miss Quick huffed and puffed as she sped through the woods as if she was late for a very important appointment, which she wasn't. Little Miss Stubborn argued about which was the right way at every fork in the trail, and Mr. Fussy fussed and blustered. The sun was too bright. He didn't like the insects. Why was the path so uneven? And so on and so on. Poor Mr. Calm. It wasn't what he had in mind at all. But, being Mr. Calm, he kept his calm. And being Mr. Calm, he had a trick up his sleeve. As he was walking along, he began to whistle a charming tune. The soothing music filled the woods, floating melodically on the breeze and filling the ears of his friends. It was so enchanting and tranquil that all his friends calmed down. It was like magic, and maybe it was. Mr. Calm whistled his way through the woods, and it seemed the whistle was catching on, for in no time at all, his friends were whistling along as well. They were even all whistling the same tune, and as they whistled, his friends started to notice things. They noticed the play of sunlight on the leaves. They noticed the sound of the birds singing. They noticed the butterflies flitting from flower to flower, and they noticed the soft, cool moss under their feet. In unison, they all breathed a calm sigh of contentment. The only sound that disturbed the peace was...
Sorry, apologized Mr. Noisy. I got the hiccups.
Go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and sing. Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Fib. Now, I think that we all tell fibs, sometimes to get out of trouble, sometimes to exaggerate what we have done, and even sometimes to avoid hurting other people's feelings. Like Mr. Happy telling Little Miss Splendid that her new hat looked wonderful, when in fact it looked ridiculous. You might say that this sort of lie makes the world a happier place. However, too many fibs can be a bad thing, as in the case of Mr. Fib, who was never honest. There were only fibs and more fibs. He fibbed about how many eggs he could eat at breakfast to Mr. Strong. He fibbed about how big his house was to Little Miss Splendid. Then he blamed Little Miss Tiny when he spilt juice on Little Miss Splendid's pristine white rug. And he fibbed after he had been out fishing and caught nothing. "You should have seen the one that got away! It was this big!" he exclaimed, stretching his arms out wide. It was a big fib that grew bigger as the day went by. And not just the fib, the fish grew as well. By lunchtime, he was telling everyone the fish had been 1 meter long. By tea time, it was 2 meters long. And by supper, it was as long as Mr. Tall's leg. What you might call a tall story. You see, Mr. Fib lied to impress people. He boasted that he was cleverer than Mr. Clever. He bragged that he was luckier than Little Miss Lucky. And he even claimed to have more magic in his little finger than Little Miss Magic had in her whole body. Just one big fib after another. Now, one day, Mr. Fib was walking down the beach when he saw Mr. Bump coming towards him. As he drew closer, Mr. Bump tripped and fell in the water. Mr. Fib helped Mr. Bump up. Mr. Bump said, "Thank you," and they went their separate ways. A small moment in an uneventful walk. But by the next day, the moment had grown. A bit like the fish he fibbed about. Now Mr. Fib had saved Mr. Bump from drowning. He had saved Mr. Bump from drowning in a terrible storm at sea. He had saved Mr. Bump from drowning in a terrible storm at sea while fighting off a shark. The news of Mr. Bump's rescue went round town in a flash. Mr. Fib was called a hero. He gladly repeated his heroic tale. People told him what a jolly good fellow he was and patted him on the back. The mayor got to hear of it and decided that something must be done to reward this remarkable deed. There was a grand ceremony, and the mayor awarded Mr. Fib a medal of bravery. Mr. Fib beamed with pride. False pride. But then people started to ask questions. Was there a storm on the day in question? Yes, said Mr. Fib. Was Mr. Bump out on the boat? Of course, exclaimed Mr. Fib. Are there sharks off the coast of Seatown? Undoubtedly, cried Mr. Fib. But the next day, the truth came out. Mr. Bump had not been out at sea. There had been no storm. There had been no rescue, and there was no shark. Mr. Fib's lie had been found out. The mayor was angry and took back the medal. The people of the town were furious. Mr. Fib was shunned and ignored. However, Mr. Fib did not learn his lesson, and his fibs became even more outrageous. He changed his story and said it was really Little Miss Tiny who he had rescued, which was clearly nonsense. He swore they had been swallowed by a whale, more nonsense. But he could not help himself, and the more he fibbed, the more angry everyone became. So much so that Little Miss Magic started to feel sorry for Mr. Fib. She wanted to help him. But how do you stop the world's greatest fibber from telling fibs? And then she had an idea. With a wave of her magic wand and some muttered magic words, she put her plan into action. The next day, Mr. Fib strode up Little Miss Quick's driveway. She was proudly washing her new sports car. "That looks fast," remarked Mr. Fib, "but I bet it's not as fast as my rocket-powered super-galactic—" But before Mr. Fib could boast about his non-existent flying space car, something extraordinary happened. His tongue began to grow. And it grew, and it grew, until it was so long that Mr. Fib could not speak. And because he could not speak, he could not make up fibs. He rolled up his tongue and went back home. By the next morning, he was back to normal. A bit later, he passed by Mr. Strong, who was carrying his fridge to the repair shop to be fixed. "You are strong," said Mr. Fib, "but you should have seen what I lifted last week. Flub, flub, flibbity, flub." I'm sure you can guess what had happened. That's right. His tongue had grown again, and he couldn't talk properly. And more to the point, he couldn't tell the big fib of how much stronger he was than Mr. Strong. And so it went on all week. Each time he was about to fib, his tongue grew. Flib, flib, flibbity, flib. And as the week went by, he became more cautious about what he was going to say. He began to tell the truth. And the more he told the truth, the more everyone believed him. Mr. Fib discovered that he liked this new feeling. He liked being believed. In time, he became as honest as the day is long. Little Miss Magic was very pleased with him, and remarkably, everyone came to value Mr. Fib's opinion, like Little Miss Splendid. "Good morning," said Little Miss Splendid. "What do you think of my new hat?" What should he do? Mr. Fib ummed and ahed, and then he fibbed. "That's a very nice hat." "Well done, Mr. Fib. That was the right answer."